Nigeria's primary healthcare officials are on a nationwide vaccination campaign in collaboration with the United Nations, in line with activities to mark the African Vaccination Week. Now, while that is still ongoing, the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, has come out with an alarming figure on vaccination. In a statement released yesterday, the 23rd of April, UNICEF says only 1 out of 4 children in Nigeria receive all the recommended vaccines. The report also said that despite great strides in reducing under 5-year-old children's deaths between 2011 to 2016, coverage of immunization routine has declined. The statement quotes 158 deaths per 1,000 live births. How alarmed should Nigerians be? Where in Nigeria are the millions of under 5 children at risk of death, despite government's continuous vaccination efforts? What is the Nigerian primary health care services doing to save them, particularly through routine immunization? All these issues and more are on the table this evening live on Nigeria Today. My name is Joy Usiago. In the studio with me to discuss vaccination is the Executive Director and Chief Executive of the National Healthcare Development Agency in Abuja. He is Dr. Faisal Shuaibu. You're welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much and good evening, everyone.
We also have Dr. Isaac Akwoma Egboja, a public health expert and former employee of the United Nations. Welcome and thanks for joining us on the program.
Thank you very much. Good evening, viewers.
All right, Dr. Shuaib, I want to start with you. You saw the figures there that UNICEF rolled out yesterday. I'm sure you saw the papers also. Is that where we are in Nigeria? I want you to speak to these figures that we're seeing because it sounds alarming.
Right, those figures are absolutely correct, and those are figures that the federal government of Nigeria has taken the bold step of accepting. So although these figures look really bad, it didn't start last year, it didn't start during this administration. However, this is the first time in Nigeria that the government has accepted that the truth is we're not reaching our kids the way we're supposed to reach our kids. So in the course of several decades, right, there's what we call the administrative data. That is data that the health workers say represents the coverage figures for our kids. But every 2 to 3 years, we also do an evaluation that goes to every household and finds out, you know, if kids have truly been immunized. The last evaluation was in 2016, and that represented, you know, vaccination of the previous year. And it came out that only some 23% of kids have received full vaccination. And in the spirit of this administration, we said, yes, you know, we're not going to say we have a vaccination coverage of 98% or 100%. When we actually see that kids continue to die, we see kids have outbreaks. Everywhere you go in the country, you find outbreaks of measles, you find outbreaks of whooping cough sometimes. And we said, instead of deluding ourselves and say that we have high coverage figures, we're going to be honest and say, yes, it's just 23%. So last year when I came on board as the executive director of the agency, we looked at the results and we said we were outraged by this, that Nigeria deserves better. Nigeria has a higher capacity to provide immunization to its citizens. So in collaboration with the Federal Ministry of Health, we declared a state of public health concern, and we set up an emergency routine immunization coordinating center at the National Primary Healthcare Development Agency to work with the states, to work with state governors and understand why these figures are so low, and implement and execute with a high degree of efficiency those methods, those strategies that we already know are important to deliver routine immunization to to our communities. That is why in this week of the African Vaccination Week, we're also rolling out an optimized routine immunization strategy that ensures that there's close collaboration with the communities. So we're working from the communities, from bottom upwards, working with traditional leaders, working with religious leaders, working with opinion leaders, political leaders, and asking what the questions are, what are the barriers such as funding, bringing everybody together to create awareness around the importance of immunization. So we're very optimistic that in the course of the next few weeks, we'll begin to see people coming out to the health facilities, to the outreach sessions to take routine immunization. It's not going to happen overnight, but what we're doing is saying that in the past we've stumbled, but we're using these stumbling blocks as the foundation to lay a strong routine immunization system in Nigeria.
All right, let me go quickly to Dr. Egboja. I want to hear your own opinion. Is there still a high rate of under-5 mortality in this country?
Yes. It used to be worse. Many years ago, it was 175 per 1,000 live beds. It has dropped now to about 160. That's still bad, but it's better than what it used to be at some point in time. The infant mortality at the moment is about 75 per 1,000 live beds. It was worse than that. Maternal mortality at the moment is about 500 for 100,000 live beds. It was at some point 1,000, and then it came to about 850. It dropped to about 700, 600. Now it's about 500. We are getting better, but we are still far behind.
Now, I know that in the past, we hear a lot about routine immunization. At least I know most of our reporters used to go out for coverage of this event. So, with all that happening, why do we still have this challenge?
Let me explain something. And I'm glad the word they use is complete immunization. If a child takes, for example, DPT, you're supposed to take it 3 times. A child takes it twice. That's not complete immunization for that antigen. If a child takes BCG, DPT, and measles, he has not taken complete doses of the antigens that he needs to protect him or her. So that word complete is very key for us to note. And that's one of the reasons why the figures are as high as they are reported by UNICEF and also accepted by the Executive Secretary of National Primary Healthcare Development Agency. The need for us to routinely accept the fact that a child born today needs to be immunized on that day and continue until the child is 9 months old, take measles, and graduate then after. Then we will be worrying about other sporadic things like yellow fever, hepatitis, and so on later down the line. It's very important. We've been singing about this for years. That you recall that in Nigeria many years ago, we were spending so much money and time doing these sporadic national immunization days, which were campaigns, sometimes once or twice a year. Not that campaigns are bad, but campaigns should augment routine immunization. You can never change that formula, and you will never get the correct answer until you make sure that routine immunization is your key approach. Any other thing is addition. And I'm glad from what the Executive Secretary has just said, the emphasis now is on routine immunization. Some years back, and he also mentioned that we are looking at how we've done in the past, what mistakes we made, and how to change our approach. The big mistake we've made, and I was privileged to be on this program some years back, and I mentioned the same thing, is that we were spending too much time, too much money on these campaigns. Those monies could be channeled into routine immunization, building more national, primary healthcare facilities, hiring more staff to man them, training them properly, providing the cold chain that we need, and the vaccines. Okay. Fortunately, our international partners like WHO, UNICEF, Rotary Club are assisting us. But we need to do our own homework by making sure that the health facilities are working, the staff are in place, so that when these people come to help us buy, normally they help us buy vaccines and the cold chain, so that bringing in the health facility, bringing in the staff, you are augmenting it that with the vaccines that we need, and the continued manpower training that is being done by the Federal Ministry of Health, State's Ministry of Health, and of course the National Primary Healthcare Development Agency. All
right, let me go quickly to Dr. CHOGM. You know, we have talked about the issue of manpower training. We've also talked about the support from partners. I want us to also look at the community. I mean, we're looking at some of the challenges that we had, where the problem came from in the first place. What about the community? Because I know that there are some communities where some parents are not willing to release their children out for routine immunization. What about that?
Right. So again, this is around the lack of awareness around how important immunizations are to the kids. This is one of the reasons why during this week we're going to be trying to do everything to increase awareness that vaccinations, immunizations do provide protection for children against vaccine preventable diseases. And it cannot be MPACDA, it cannot be just the Federal Ministry of Health. We need everybody to be out there. So we're launching a new strategy. For instance, we're going to be talking to the public servants, we're talking to political leaders to go back to their communities with a clear understanding that immunization saves lives. And they need to take that message to their communities. So it's not just us who are working in the space of immunization that's talking about immunization. It needs to be everybody. There's no controversy about the fact that immunizations, right, have been perhaps the single most important public health intervention that has reduced maternal and child deaths. Why can't we take this all the way to our communities, right? And this is why I think it's also important for me to just sort of rephrase what the public health expert has said. So we cannot eradicate diseases without the proper sets of strategies. So for example, for polio eradication, you need 3 strong strategies. You need to have a strong routine immunization system. You need to carry out campaigns, you know, to make sure that everybody gets the medicines that are required, the oral polio vaccines, for instance, and then you need to do surveillance, right? All of that needs to be strong, right? What has happened in the last few years is that a lot of attention was paid to the campaigns, but health workers also sort of took their eyes off the ball and they didn't do enough around creating awareness that it is not just the polio drop that protects kids against all kinds of diseases, that apart from the polio drops, you also need to go to the health facilities and take other immunizations.
So are your eyes on the ball right now?
Absolutely. There's no doubt in our minds that we cannot even finish the job of polio eradication without a strong routine immunization system. That is why every single day at the National Primary Healthcare Development Agency, we're looking at all those strategies that we need to implement to ensure that kids get the right vaccines. So after setting up the coordinating center at the national level, we have also replicated them at the states and the local government level, working again with states and the local government and the traditional institutions. Because even with the polio that's almost eradicated, we did not reach the kind of milestone that we reach now without close collaboration with the people in the grassroots, with the traditional institution.
All right, we'll come back to this same issue, but we'll take a break now. You're watching Nigeria Today live on NTA News 24, and we're discussing some matters arising from the African Vaccination Week, which ends on the 30th of April. We'll now take a short break to hear what Nigerians have to say on the issue.
To avoid those dangerous diseases, that is the more reason every parent should make sure that the children are vaccinated. By the grace of God, I have children, and they've been immunized adequately, properly.
We encourage mothers to allow their children to be vaccinated. It helps in preventing those sicknesses Instead of occurring, you prevent them ahead of its time.
Okay. There's an aphorism that says prevention is better than cure. The whole concept of vaccination is to introduce your body to what is current, so that when it happens, your body will recognize and your body will be empowered to avoid it or deal with it.
I have 3 kids and I've been immunizing them. Even recently, this polio immunization is just coming up. I'm preparing to take my children, then probably maybe within the week. Please try and immunize your children, and also try to get information. Even if they don't, go to primary health centers and get informed and immunize your children appropriately. It helps so that it will keep your children healthy, and they'll be strong and they will not fall sick easily.
Children not immunized could die. They are always sickly, they are not strong, they are always weak. So it's advisable every mom, parents, immunize their children. All mothers, please take your children for immunization. It's absolutely free and there is no side effect to that. You will not regret. And also, I'm calling out to husbands and fathers too. You may have a careless wife. Always encourage your wives to take your children for immunization.
We're back in the studio live with Dr. Faisal CHOGM, Executive Director and Chief Executive of the National Healthcare Development Agency in Abuja, and Dr. Isaac Apuma Egboja, a public health expert and former employee of the United Nations. Gentlemen, we thank you for still staying with us here on the program. Now, you listen to the people there. Let me start with you, Dr. Egboja. What's your impression about what you heard?
I'm very impressed. Very impressed, especially that it is coming from those that we are trying to reach, and they are talking to their fellow women and fellow husbands. I mean, talking to their husbands and their fellow women about the importance of immunization. This is very key. One of the things that Doctor just said that I totally agree with, and I would want to emphasize, is the fact that the immunization exercise is shared between the federal, the state, and the local governments. While the federal government is providing the vaccines, the coaching, and so on, and the supervision, states should take their own responsibility too, seriously. And then the local government authorities should be the one that are field soldiers in the field, immunizing people, checking out which community has not been reached, finding out what the problems are at the local level. He here, or the Minister of Health at the national level, cannot know what is going on in detail in every state. It's not possible. And even the state governors cannot know everything that is going on in each of their local governments in detail. They may know some things, but not everything. But the local government chairpersons know their local governments, know their communities, know where they have problems, and they should be the ones that are foot soldiers right there in the field, receiving help from the state and receiving help from the federal government. If people understand that this is our own, it's not somebody giving you something that is not your own. This is your own program. This is your own community. This is your own children.
Take responsibility.
And take responsibility for it.
All right, I'll still come back to you on the issue of responsibility, but let me hear Dr. CHOGM's views about what we heard there. Now, these are people who, some people watching might say, oh, these ones are in the urban areas. What about those in the rural areas? Are they aware as much as we heard those ones talking this evening?
Right, I'll just say thumbs up for those viewers, the people who were interviewed. Of course, these people live in the urban areas, and that is why I mentioned earlier that if every parent had the same kinds of views as those expressed by the people interviewed, then our work will be reduced by more than 75%. So the message now needs to go from the urban areas, from the civil servants to the communities, and that is why we're launching this strategy to say civil servants now need to go back to their communities. When they go, for example, on holidays or they go for the weekend, go to your primary healthcare center and tough questions about how that primary health care center is being managed.
Now, sorry to cut you short, you did lay emphasis on the issue of those in the urban areas, civil servants, going back before we went on the break. I want you to touch more on the issue of traditional institutions. I know that many people in the rural areas hold traditional leaders in high esteem. They look up to them. Once they say, go ahead and get your children vaccinated, they do so. How about that particular aspect of it? Are you talking to traditional institutions?
Oh, absolutely. The traditional institution has been central to the progress that we've made with polio eradication, right? So we're now at a point where, apart from a few LGAs in Borno, the rest of Nigeria is practically free of polio, and we couldn't have achieved that feat without the traditional leaders providing the leadership. So we started to make progress in polio eradication when we worked intimately with the traditional institutions.
You're still working with them?
Absolutely, and that is exactly the key to ensuring that routine immunization improves, because the traditional institutions, the traditional leaders are able to talk to their subjects, and the subjects listen to them. They are traditional leaders, but they are also religious leaders. So their subjects take direction from them around how safe the vaccines are and how important it is. So in the new strategies that we're laying out, the traditional engagement framework requires communities to be involved in the management of their primary health care centers, and that the traditional leaders will track every child that is born to ensure that the child gets his or her immunization up to the time that the child is 9 months. So we're working very, very closely with them through the Northern Traditional Leaders Committee on Primary Health Care and Routine Immunization.
Let me go quickly to Dr. Igboja on this issue of immunization. At what stage is it too late, especially for those who are yet to be vaccinated?
Well, ideally, a child born today should start immunization and continue until the child is 9 months old and take measles, which is supposed to be the last one. If, however, that child missed that 9-month date or target, that does not mean that the child should not be immunized. Okay. That is very important. The child should still be immunized and also be given polio vaccine, especially when we find that in some communities there are sporadic epidemics of measles during dry seasons in particular. And children who are a little bit older but have not had the opportunity to be immunized should still be immunized.
Now, how safe are these vaccinations? Because I know that in some rural areas, that is what people run away from. They say, oh, they are not safe. If you take them, your children will die.
No, absolutely false. Vaccines are very, very safe. Some of them, when you give to the child may develop mild fever, controllable fever, not the type of fever that will give the mother or the parents any concern. And you bathe the baby, sponge the baby, and the temperature goes very quickly. There's nothing threatening about immunization. The antigens are safe, absolutely safe. This was one of the controversies that set us back some years ago, when some people believed that vaccines are harmful to children, and the news went wild, and traditional rulers, like he pointed out, had to come in and reassure people that the vaccines were safe. And I would want people to please accept and believe absolutely that vaccines are very safe.
All right, let's go quickly to Dr. Shoaib. You know, many people have been very critical about funding for vaccination and immunization. Some people have the belief that we're depending too much on international donor agencies. Is that true?
As of this time, yes, there's been a lot of dependence on international donors and development partners to bridge the gap. However, Nigeria currently pays for all its traditional vaccines. It is only the newer vaccines that we get support from partners such as the Gavi Alliance partners, the Gates Foundation, and then other development partners. But Nigeria pays for the traditional vaccines. However, because these are newer vaccines, they are more expensive, right? and there's a need for Nigeria to increase domestic resources towards the procurement of these vaccines. But even apart from procuring the vaccines, there's also debate around how do you take the vaccines to the communities. That also attracts some costs. We've gotten commitment from Mr. President, Mr. Vice President just today signed a letter of commitment.
So the political will is very
absolutely,
strong.
absolutely. Nigeria just signed a letter of commitment to the donors and the development partners, showing how Nigeria will increasingly commit domestic resources towards the procurement of vaccines for the next 10 years until we're able to exit from Gavi support, so that when we do exit from that support provided by the Gavi Alliance, Nigeria will be able to pay for vaccines. Do not forget the fact that Nigeria has also taken the step towards local vaccine production. So in the next few years, we're hoping that Nigerians will also be able to produce vaccines locally. So it's really an amazing and exciting time for Nigerians at Primary Healthcare Development Agency.
All right, Dr. Schreiber. Well, that's all we have time for on today's edition of Nigeria Today. And we thank you, Dr. Faisal Schreiber, for joining us in the studio.
Thank you.
And we would also like to thank Dr. Igboja for also joining us this evening. He's a regular guest here in NTA, and we want to thank you very much for your time and your contributions.
My pleasure.
Until we see again on another edition of Nigeria Today, have a good evening.